Before we step into this courtroom, do me a quick favor. If you love stories where arrogance meets consequences, hit like, subscribe, and stay to the end. Because what happens when the judge reads Clause 7 changes everything. The courthouse in Brookhaven looked like every other courthouse until you saw who walked in on the left and who walked in on the right. On one side, Grant Ward, tailored suit, polished shoes, that confident smile of a man who's never been told no and had it stick. Beside him, Victor Hale, the kind of lawyer whose watch costs more than most people's cars. On the other side, Elena Ward, no entourage, no attorney, no designer suit, just a simple dress, hair pinned back, and a folder held so tightly her knuckles looked pale. People whispered when they saw her alone. She's representing herself? She's done. He'll bury her. Even the bailiff's eyes softened for a moment, like he'd seen this scene 1,000 times. Powerful husband, expensive counsel, abandoned wife. Elena kept walking anyway. She didn't look at Grant. She didn't look at the whispers. She stared straight ahead, toward the bench, where Judge Marianne Klein was already seated, with that calm expression that made you forget she could end your life with a single signature. Grant leaned toward Victor and murmured just loudly enough for Elena to hear. "She actually came. I thought she'd stay home where she belongs." Victor's mouth twitched into a polite, practiced smile. "It'll be quick." Elena slid into her seat. Her chair squeaked, small humiliating detail that somehow felt like a warning. Judge Klein glanced down at the file. Ward versus Ward. Divorce proceedings. Enforcement of prenuptial agreement, dispute over property division, spousal support and attorney's fees. Her eyes lifted, sharp and steady. "Mr. Ward, represented by Mr. Hale. Mrs. Ward, you are appearing without counsel." Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "Yes, Your Honor." Grant let out a tiny laugh, not loud enough for the transcript, but loud enough for the room. Judge Klein's gaze slid to him. The laugh died in his throat. Victor rose smoothly. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. The parties executed a prenuptial agreement 12 years ago. The agreement is clear, valid, and enforceable. Mrs. Ward is entitled to what it provides, nothing more." He said nothing, the way people say, trash. Elena didn't react. But when Victor placed a thick binder on the table, it landed with a heavy thud, like a coffin lid closing. Judge Klein folded her hands. "Mrs. Ward, do you understand the gravity of proceeding pro se?" Elena looked at the bench, then briefly at the folder in her hands. "I do." Grant's smile widened. He thought her folder was a prop. He thought she was here to beg. He thought today would be another victory he could brag about at a private club with men who collected wives like trophies. Judge Klein nodded once. "Very well. Mr. Hale, proceed." And just like that, the trial began. On a morning when Elena Ward was about to be called just a housewife, so many times it would feel like a sentence, until it became the fuse. Victor Hale walked the courtroom the way some men walk their own living rooms, like they owned the air. "Your Honor," he began, "the prenuptial agreement was executed freely. It includes a full waiver of spousal support and an explicit statement that any assets acquired during the marriage remain separate property, if titled solely in Mr. Ward's name." He turned slightly, letting the jurors, there were none, this was a bench proceeding, still letting the gallery absorb the performance. "Mrs. Ward enjoyed a comfortable life. She lived in a home purchased by Mr. Ward. She drove vehicles purchased by Mr. Ward. She traveled on vacations paid for by Mr. Ward, and she did so by choice, without contributing financially." Eleanor's jaw tightened once. That was all. Grant leaned back in his chair and let the room admire him. "To put it plainly," Victor continued, "Mrs. Ward is seeking to rewrite a contract because she now regrets it. That is not how the law works." Judge Klein's pen moved. "Mrs. Ward, you may respond when appropriate." Victor pivoted toward Elena like a man approaching a child. "Mrs. Ward, do you deny signing the prenup?" Elena lifted her eyes. "No." "Do you deny you read it?" Grant's smile flashed, the kind that dared her to lie. Elena answered evenly. "I read it." Victor's eyebrows rose. "Then you knew what you agreed to. You knew you were waiving spousal support." Eleanor's voice stayed calm. "I knew what the document said." Victor chuckled softly. So you knew you were agreeing that the home, the company, the investments, the accounts, everything would remain Mr. Ward's. Elena paused. Not because she didn't understand, but because she understood exactly what he was trying to do. He wanted her to sound confused. He wanted her to trip over legal language. He wanted the judge to see a helpless woman who had no business speaking in court. Elena said, "I knew what it said, and I knew what it required." Grant's fingers tapped the table. Annoyed, Victor pounced. "Required? Mrs. Ward, this is not a philosophy seminar, it's a contract. It required you to do what exactly? Bake muffins?" Laughter rippled through the gallery. Nervous, ugly laughter. Grant didn't stop it. He enjoyed it. Elena's cheeks warmed, but she kept her posture straight. Judge Klein's gaze hardened. "Mr. Hale." Victor lifted both hands, feigning innocence. "I apologize, Your Honor. I'm simply highlighting the reality. Mrs. Ward has no employment history in the last 12 years. She has no independent income. She has no business experience relevant to Mr. Ward's company." Grant leaned forward, finally speaking, his voice smooth like oil. "Tell them, Elena. Tell them what you do." Elena looked at him. For a heartbeat, something old flickered there. Love, maybe, or grief for what he'd become. But Grant's eyes were cold. Elena didn't speak. Grant smiled wider. "She decorates. She plans parties. She posts pictures of our life, and now she wants half of it." His tone sharpened. "Your Honor, she's a housewife, that's all." The words landed like a slap. The courtroom went quiet, because everyone recognized the cruelty in that simplicity. Victor nodded like a man hearing truth. "Exactly, and the agreement reflects that reality." Elena inhaled slowly. She could feel every eye on her, waiting for tears, waiting for collapse. But she didn't give them the satisfaction. Judge Klein addressed Elena. "Mrs. Ward, do you have any evidence to support your claim that the prenuptial agreement should not be enforced?" Elena looked down at her folder, then back up. "Yes, Your Honor." Grant scoffed, loud and dismissive. "From where? The pantry?" Elena's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "From the prenuptial agreement itself." Victor blinked, then smiled. "Your Honor, with respect." She's grasping. Judge Klein's eyes narrowed slightly. "We'll see. Continue." Victor, sensing blood, decided to finish her before she could stand up. "Mrs. Ward, name one asset you believe you're entitled to under the prenup." Elena answered, "I'm entitled to enforcement of every clause." Grant's smile faltered, just for a second. He didn't like the word every. Victor Hale turned pages with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, we move for summary enforcement. There is no legal basis to invalidate the agreement. Mrs. Ward's claim is emotional, not factual." He held up a bank statement. "Mrs. Ward's account balance, $2,113. No retirement account, no wages, no contracts, no clients, no business entity. She has no means to maintain the lifestyle she enjoyed, yet she seeks it anyway." Elena listened, stone still. Grant watched her like a predator watches a cornered animal. Then Victor went in for the humiliation that would stick in the comments section of a YouTube video for years. "Mrs. Ward, you would like the court to believe you are suddenly an expert in the document you signed 12 years ago?" Elena answered. "I would like the court to read it." Victor laughed. "Read it, Your Honor. The agreement is already in evidence." He turned to Elena, voice dripping condescension. "You mean you want us to read it out loud? So you can pretend you didn't understand it?" Grant chimed in, casual cruelty. "She needs things read to her. It's kind of her brand." A few people in the gallery chuckled again, like they were afraid not to. Elena's fingers tightened around her folder. Judge Klein didn't laugh, she didn't smile. She simply said, "Mr. Ward, you will refrain from commentary." Grant raised his hands, feigning surrender. "Of course, Your Honor." But his eyes stayed on Elena, daring her to fight. Victor pressed on. "Mrs. Ward, let's talk about contributions. Mr. Ward built Ward Dynamics from the ground up." Elena's lips parted slightly, but Victor barreled forward, not letting her speak. "He worked, he negotiated, he took the risk, you stayed home, you shopped, you hosted, you—" Elena interrupted softly. "I raised our children." Victor's smile sharpened. "Millions of women raise children, Mrs. Ward. That's not a corporate role." The air in the courtroom chilled. Grant's face lit with smug satisfaction. Elena looked at Victor and said, "You're right, it's not corporate." Victor leaned closer. "Then we agree. You did not build the company. You did not earn its value. You are not entitled to it." Elena took a breath. "I didn't say that." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Oh? Then what are you saying?" Elena's voice was steady. "I'm saying I know what I'm entitled to." Victor straightened, as if bored. "Your Honor, we request immediate enforcement of the agreement, exclusive possession of the marital residence by Mr. Ward, and an order that Mrs. Ward vacate within 10 days. Grant finally looked at Elena with something like triumph. 10 days, he mouthed silently like a private joke. Elena's throat tightened. 10 days meant her children's rooms, her kitchen, her years, her entire identity boxed up like clutter. Judge Klein looked down at the file again. "Mrs. Ward, if you have an argument, now is the time." Elena's heart pounded so hard she could hear it. She stood slowly. Her chair scraped again. Another small humiliation. She lifted her folder and walked to the lectern with the measured calm of someone stepping onto thin ice. "Your Honor," she began, "I'm not here to rewrite anything. I'm here to enforce what we both signed." Victor folded his arms. "Go on." Elena looked at Grant, then back to the judge. "May I request that the court read Clause 7 of the prenuptial agreement into the record?" Victor's smile froze. Grant's brows knit together, annoyed. "Clause 7, he muttered, like it was an inconvenience. Victor recovered quickly. "Your Honor, that's unnecessary. The agreement is clear." Elena didn't move. "It's necessary." Judge Klein studied Elena, then Victor, then Grant. "Mr. Hale, why would reading a clause of the agreement be unnecessary?" Victor's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Because it doesn't change the outcome." Elena's voice cut through, quiet but sharp. "It changes everything." And for the first time that morning, the courtroom felt like it leaned forward. If you've ever watched someone underestimate the wrong person, you know the moment right before the fall feels almost silent. That's what happened when Judge Klein said, "Clark, locate Clause 7. And before we go any further, if you're still with me, tap like and subscribe because the next few minutes are where the entire story flips." The clerk shuffled papers, flipping pages. Victor Hale's fingers drummed once on the table, then stopped. Grant leaned toward him, whispering harshly, "What is she doing?" Victor kept his eyes on the bench. "Nothing that matters." But his voice didn't sound as confident as before. The clerk cleared her throat. "Clause 7. Judge Klein nodded. "Read," the clerk began, voice formal and even. "Clause 7. Full disclosure, marital misconduct, and bad faith enforcement." The words hung in the air like a sudden storm cloud. Grant's posture stiffened. Victor's eyes flicked to the document, then to Elena, then away. The clerk continued. "In the event either party seeks enforcement of this agreement while having concealed assets, provided incomplete disclosure, or engaged in marital misconduct as defined herein," Victor cut in. "Your Honor." Judge Klein raised a hand without looking at him. "Let her read." The clerk kept going. "Marital misconduct includes but is not limited to adultery, diversion of marital funds for non-marital relationships, and material financial deception." The gallery murmured. Grant's face reddened. He scoffed too loudly. "That's ridiculous." Elena didn't look at him. She stared at the bench like it was the only thing anchoring her to the room. The clerk read the part that turned Victor Hale's expensive confidence into something brittle. "Upon proof of such conduct, the violating party shall forfeit the protections of clauses 2 through 6, including waiver of support and separate property protections, and shall be liable for 1. Immediate payment of legal fees incurred by the non-violating party, 2. Transfer of 25% equity interest in Ward Dynamics, whether direct or beneficial, to the non-violating party, 3. Appointment of an independent forensic accountant selected by drafting counsel." Grant shot to his feet. "What the hell is that?" Judge Klein's voice snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Ward." Grant sat, but his eyes were wild now, no longer amused. Victor stood, strained politeness masking urgency. "Your Honor, this clause it's boilerplate language that—" Elena spoke before he could finish, still calm. "It's not boilerplate." Victor turned toward her, voice sharp. "Mrs. Ward, you're not an attorney." Elena held his gaze. No, I'm the person who made sure that clause existed. The courtroom went still again, but this time it wasn't silence before a fall. It was the silence after a gun is cocked. Judge Klein leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Ward, are you alleging Mr. Ward concealed assets or engaged in misconduct as defined in the agreement? Elena didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. Victor gave a short, incredulous laugh. And you can prove this? Elena opened her folder. Inside wasn't a stack of random papers. It was organized. Tabs labeled sections, a thin envelope sealed and stamped. She held it up gently, like evidence that could cut flesh. I can. Grant's voice broke through, contempt turning into anger. You think you can stand here and accuse me of... Eleanor's eyes finally met his. You filed first, Grant. You wanted to humiliate me in public. You didn't even remember what you signed. Victor stepped forward, controlling his tone. Your Honor, we object. Allegations without counsel, without proper foundation. Judge Klein's gaze hardened. Then provide foundation. Mrs. Ward, what do you have? Elena swallowed once. First, I have the disclosure affidavit Mr. Ward filed with the prenup. Victor's eyes narrowed. Elena continued. And I have proof it was false. Grant scoffed, but there was fear under it now. Proof? From where? Elena placed the sealed envelope on the clerk's desk. From the firm that drafted the prenup. Victor's head snapped toward the envelope as if it had grown teeth. Judge Klein's voice cooled. Mrs. Ward, how did you obtain that? Elena answered quietly. Because Clause 7 required it. And then she said the sentence that made Victor Hale's mouth go dry. Your Honor, I request the court subpoena drafting counsel, the attorney who wrote this agreement, the one Mr. Ward thought would never speak again. Grant's face tightened. No. Judge Klein looked at him. That's not your decision. Elena stood there, small against the marble and wood, but for the first time, she didn't look like the losing party. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment for years. When the courtroom reconvened after a short recess, the air felt different, thicker, charged. Grant Ward wasn't smiling anymore. Victor Hale whispered urgently to him, but Grant's gaze stayed locked on Elena like he was trying to crush her with it. Elena sat quietly, hands folded, as if she had all the time in the world. Judge Klein returned and asked, Has drafting counsel been notified? The clerk nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Victor stood quickly. Your Honor, I must again object. Drafting counsel's testimony is unnecessary. The agreement, Judge Klein interrupted, calm but firm. Mr. Hale, your client is seeking enforcement. Clause 7 is part of the agreement. If Mrs. Ward alleges a triggering event and claims she can prove it, I will hear it. Victor's jaw clenched. Understood. Then the door at the side of the courtroom opened and a woman stepped in who didn't look impressed by marble, money, or ego. Lydia Chen. Late 60s, hair silver, posture straight as a ruler, carrying a briefcase that looked older than Victor Hale's career. She approached the witness stand without hesitation, as if she'd walked into courtrooms her entire life, which, in a way, she had. After swearing in, Judge Klein asked, Ms. Chen, did you draft the prenuptial agreement between Elena Ward and Grant Ward? Lydia's voice was clear. Yes. Victor tried to soften. Ms. Chen, do you recall the circumstances? Lydia looked at him, then at Grant. Perfectly. The way she said it made Grant shift in his seat. Lydia continued. Mr. Ward insisted on extensive protections. He wanted the strictest terms allowed. He wanted it airtight. Victor nodded, and Mrs. Ward agreed. Lydia's eyes flicked to Elena, something like respect passing between them. Mrs. Ward agreed to protections, yes. Victor leaned in. Then Clause 7 is standard language. Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line. No. Victor froze. Lydia continued. Clause 7 is not standard. It was negotiated. He fought it. She insisted. The gallery murmured. Grant's voice burst out. That's not... Judge Klein cut him off. Mr. Ward. Lydia didn't even glance at him. Mrs. Ward insisted on Clause 7 because she understood something Mr. Ward did not. Victor scoffed. And what is that? Lydia's eyes finally landed on Victor, steady and unblinking. That a contract isn't protection if the person you're protecting yourself from is willing to cheat. Grant's face flushed. Victor snapped. Objection. Judge Klein's tone sharpened. Overruled. Continue. Lydia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thin file. Clause 7 required full disclosure, including beneficial interests. It required an affidavit. And it required that a sealed copy of the disclosure schedule be kept with my firm, to be opened if Clause 7 was invoked. Victor's voice tightened. There is no proof Clause 7 was invoked properly. Elena stood. Your Honor, may I? Judge Klein nodded. Elena turned to Lydia, respectful. Miss Chen, does the sealed copy exist? Lydia held up a document with a red seal. Yes. Grant's shoulders tensed. That's private. Elena's voice stayed controlled. It was private until he dragged me here, Judge Klein motioned. Submit it. The clerk took the sealed document. Victor leaned toward Grant, whispering, panicked now. Grant shook his head, eyes burning. Elena spoke again, not to Grant, not to Victor, straight to the bench. Your Honor, Mr. Ward filed his own disclosure schedule in this case. It omits accounts that were disclosed in the original schedule. Victor snapped, She has no foundation. Lydia cut in calmly, I can provide foundation. Then Lydia said the sentence that made Grant's breath catch. Because I remember the accounts. The courtroom seemed to tilt. Judge Klein's pen stopped. Proceed, Miss Chen. Lydia looked down at the sealed schedule as if reading a ghost. There were 3 investment accounts listed under a holding entity. There was a trust interest. And there was an offshore account disclosed as temporary. Grant shot up again. That's not what... Judge Klein's gavel struck once. Sit down. Grant sat, shaking with anger. Elena's eyes glistened, not with weakness, something sharper. Your Honor, Elena said, I didn't come here to beg. I came here because he lied under oath. Victor's voice turned icy. Mrs. Ward, accusing a man of perjury is serious. Elena met his eyes. So is committing it. And then, like a blade sliding out of a sheath, Elena added, I have the bank letter. Grant's head snapped toward her. What bank letter? Elena didn't answer him. She handed it to the clerk. The letterhead was crisp. The language was formal. But the message was simple. An account existed. And it was not in the disclosure Grant just filed. Victor Hale stared at it like it was a bomb. Judge Klein read silently, then looked up. Mr. Ward, explain. Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time, he didn't look powerful, he looked caught. Grant tried to recover with the only weapon he'd ever relied on, contempt. He forced a laugh. Your Honor, this is absurd. She went digging through things that aren't hers. She's desperate. Elena didn't flinch. I went digging through the marriage you tried to erase. Victor stepped forward quickly. Your Honor, even if an account exists, it may not be relevant. Judge Klein's voice cut cleanly through. It is relevant if it was disclosed originally and omitted now. Mr. Ward filed a sworn statement. Her eyes hardened. That is not a suggestion, that is an oath. Victor swallowed. Understood. Elena looked down at her folder and turned another tab. Your Honor, there's more. Grant scoffed. Of course there is. Elena's voice stayed quiet, but every word hit. Mr. Ward claims I contributed nothing, that I'm just a housewife. She paused. He didn't mention why I became one. Victor rolled his eyes as if bored. Your Honor, this is becoming... Judge Klein held up a hand. Let her speak. Elena exhaled slowly. 12 years ago, Ward Dynamics wasn't Ward Dynamics. It was a rented office above a laundromat. Grant's eyes widened slightly, an involuntary flicker of memory. Elena continued. Grant wasn't wearing tailored suits. He was begging investors to give him 10 minutes. The gallery leaned in. Elena's fingers slid a document forward. This is the original pitch deck. Victor scoffed. Anyone can print a deck. Elena looked at him, not with my handwriting in the margin. She turned the page slightly so the judge could see. There it was. Notes, edits, diagrams. Elena's handwriting. Judge Klein's brow tightened. Elena continued. I wrote the brand positioning. I built the first client proposals. I negotiated the contract that got us our first major customer. Grant snapped. That's not true. Elena's eyes met his again. Then explain why the client's signature is on an email chain with my name. Victor's confidence faltered. Your Honor, this is irrelevant to enforcement. Elena interrupted, still polite. It's relevant to motive. He wanted me to look useless, so the court would treat me like I was disposable. Judge Klein's gaze narrowed. Mrs. Ward, do you have evidence of these claims beyond documents you prepared? Elena nodded once. Yes. She turned to the clerk. Your Honor, I request to call Marcus Reed. Victor blinked. Marcus Reed. Grant's head snapped toward Victor. Why would she call? The door opened again. A man in a plain suit stepped in, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the room like he expected to be attacked. Marcus Reed, former Chief Financial Officer of Ward Dynamics. The gallery murmured. People recognized him. His resignation had been a small business headline months ago, wrapped in vague statements about personal reasons. Marcus took the oath, hands trembling slightly. Victor stood, trying to regain control. Mr. Reed, you were terminated for cause, correct? Marcus's jaw clenched. I resigned. Victor smiled, sharp. After mismanaging funds. Marcus looked at the judge. After refusing to sign off on fraud. The room went still. Grant's face went pale in a way money couldn't fix. Victor snapped, Objection. Judge Klein's eyes were ice. Overruled. Continue. Elena spoke gently, almost compassionate. Marcus, did Grant Ward instruct you to move assets prior to filing this divorce? Marcus swallowed hard. Yes. Grant barked. Liar. Judge Klein's gavel struck. Mr. Ward, Marcus continued, voice gaining strength. He created entities, shifted revenue, parked money where he thought no one would look. Victor tried to cut in. Mr. Reed, you have a grudge. Marcus turned to Victor, anger flaring. I have a conscience. Elena asked the question that made the courtroom breathe differently. Did he do it to keep it from me? Marcus looked at Elena, then down. Yes. Grant's face twisted with rage. You don't get to... Elena's voice rose slightly for the first time. I get to know the truth about my own life. Marcus took a breath. He told me she'll leave with a suitcase, that's all she's worth. The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Elena blinked rapidly, fighting tears, not because she was broken, but because it hurt to hear what she'd suspected confirmed out loud. Judge Klein's voice was low. Mr. Reed, do you have documentation? Marcus reached into a folder and pulled out printed internal memos, account transfers, and an email chain. Yes. Victor stared at the papers like the floor had opened. Grant whispered through clenched teeth, You're dead. Marcus looked at him and said quietly, You already tried. Elena turned back to the judge. Your Honor, Clause 7 requires proof of concealment. I'm presenting it. Judge Klein's eyes lifted slowly to Grant Ward. Mr. Ward, her voice was calm, but it carried weight. You are in serious trouble. Grant's arrogance cracked. But instead of backing down, he did what arrogant men do when cornered. He doubled down. And that's when Elena reached for the final piece. The one that didn't just prove concealment, it proved betrayal. Grant Ward stood so fast his chair scraped the floor, loud enough to make people flinch. This is a setup, he spat. She found some disgruntled employee and... Judge Klein's stare stopped him mid-sentence. Sit. Grant's chest heaved. He sat, but his hands shook with restrained fury. Victor Hale rose carefully, voice measured. Your Honor, even if there were transfers, they could have legitimate explanations. Businesses move funds routinely. Elena cut in, not loud, just firm. Not when you hide them from sworn disclosures. Victor's eyes flashed. Mrs. Ward, you're testifying now? Elena didn't blink. I'm presenting evidence. Judge Klein nodded. Proceed. Elena opened her folder to another tab. Your Honor, Clause 7 also covers marital misconduct. Grant's face twisted. Oh my God. He laughed, bitter and forced. You're really doing this? Elena's voice tightened. You did this. Victor stepped forward quickly. Your Honor, allegations of adultery are inflammatory and... Judge Klein's voice was sharp. Clause 7 defines it as a trigger. If she has evidence, I will hear it. The gallery buzzed. Phones were forbidden, but people leaned like they wanted to record with their eyes. Elena held up a thin report. This is from a licensed investigator. Grant snapped. You spied on me? Elena's eyes glistened. I verified what you made me doubt. She slid the report to the clerk. It contained dates, locations, receipts, and photos. Nothing graphic, just undeniable. A hotel lobby, a private dining room. Grant's hand on a woman's back as they entered an elevator. Judge Klein scanned, expression unreadable. Victor tried to speak, but his voice faltered. "Your Honor," Elena continued before he could regroup. "And this," she pulled out a credit card statement, "shows company funds used for those trips. The same funds Mr. Ward now claims are untouchable separate property." Marcus Reed's jaw tightened as if confirming silently. Grant's face went red. "That's business travel." Elena looked at him, voice trembling slightly now, not with weakness, with fury kept under glass. "Then why did you expense her jewelry?" A sharp inhale rippled through the room. Victor's mask cracked. "Jewelry?" Elena turned another page. A receipt. Grant's name. A luxury boutique. A line item. Gift packaging. Grant barked a laugh. "So what? A gift, I give gifts." Elena's voice dropped. "To your assistant, Lila." The name landed like a grenade. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my." Grant's mouth opened, then shut. Victor looked momentarily stunned, then snapped into damage control. "Your Honor, this is hearsay, speculation." Judge Klein's eyes stayed on Grant. "Mr. Ward, is Lila Jensen your executive assistant?" Grant's jaw worked. "Yes." "Was she the recipient of company-funded gifts?" Grant's eyes darted toward Victor, pleading without words. Victor's face was tight, calculating. Grant answered, "No." Marcus Reed's voice, quiet but clear, cut through. "That's perjury." Grant snapped his head toward Marcus. "Shut up." Judge Klein's gavel hit hard. "Mr. Ward, one more outburst and you will be removed." Grant's breath came fast. Elena stood straighter, as if the courtroom itself was finally making room for her. "Your Honor," she said, "Clause 7 requires proof. I'm asking the court to compel records from Ward Dynamics and subpoena Lila Jensen." Victor lunged. "Your Honor, that's—" Judge Klein held up a hand. "I'm considering it." Grant's voice cracked, panic and rage mixing. "You can't take my company because she's jealous." Elena's eyes flashed. "Jealous?" Her voice rose, the controlled calm finally breaking into something raw. "I'm not jealous. I'm done being erased." Judge Klein leaned forward. "Mrs. Ward, you stated earlier you had proof the disclosure affidavit was false." Elena nodded and held up one last document, a single page, signed. "This is Mr. Ward's affidavit." She looked at the judge. "And this is the line where he swore he had no beneficial interests in offshore accounts." She turned to Grant. "Under oath." Grant tried to laugh again, but it sounded like choking. "You don't even know what beneficial interest means." Elena's lips curved slightly, sad almost. "I do." And then she delivered the sentence that turned the room upside down. "Because I'm the one who drafted the language that defines it." Victor Hale froze. Judge Klein's eyes sharpened. Grant stared, stunned. Elena continued, voice steady again. "I studied contract law before I became your wife." Grant shook his head, disbelieving. "No." Elena's eyes didn't waver. "Yes." She let the silence hang, then added softly, "You never asked." Judge Klein's voice was low, careful. "Mrs. Ward, explain." Elena inhaled. "I didn't marry him as a clueless girl. I negotiated that prenup. I wrote Clause 7 with Ms. Chen's guidance, and I built safeguards because I knew exactly who Grant Ward was when no one was watching." Grant looked like the floor had vanished beneath him, and for the first time the title made sense, not as a hook but as a warning. They called her just a housewife, until the contract spoke back. Judge Klein ordered a brief pause, but it wasn't mercy. It was control. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I want you to understand something. If your client filed a false affidavit and omitted assets, this court can impose sanctions, order forensic accounting, and refer matters for further investigation. Do you understand?" Victor's voice was tight. "Yes, Your Honor." Grant leaned in, hissing at Victor. "Fix this." Victor didn't answer right away, because for once there wasn't a quick fix. Elena remained standing, hands resting lightly on the lectern, eyes steady. She wasn't performing. She was surviving and winning. Judge Klein looked directly at Grant. "Mr. Ward, I am ordering immediate disclosure of all accounts, domestic and foreign, in which you hold any interest, direct or beneficial. I am also ordering a temporary restraining order preventing transfer or liquidation of assets pending review." Grant's head snapped up. How you can't do that? Judge Klein's voice was calm, lethal. Watch me. The gallery practically held its breath. Victor tried again, weaker. Your Honor, we request time to review the allegations and respond. Judge Klein nodded. You'll have it, but not at the expense of the truth. She turned to Elena. Mrs. Ward, you requested subpoena of Ms. Jensen. Elena nodded once. Yes. Judge Klein wrote a note. Granted. Grant surged forward in his chair, voice rising. This is insane. She's manipulating you. Elena's eyes burned. You manipulated me for 12 years. Grant's face twisted. You were nothing before me. Elena's voice softened, and somehow that softness cut deeper. Before you, I had my name, my career, my spine. I gave you my life. You took it and called it yours. Judge Klein's gavel struck again. Enough. She looked at Grant with something like disgust. Mr. Ward, you came into this court seeking to humiliate your wife and enforce a contract you barely remember. You will not turn this courtroom into a stage for your ego. Grant's breath hitched. For the first time, he looked small. Not poor, not powerless, just exposed. Elena swallowed hard. Your Honor, she said quietly, I also request temporary support. Not because I can't survive without him, but because Clause 7 states he is responsible for legal fees and support if he triggered it. Victor's eyes flashed. Your Honor, she cannot interpret the contract. Judge Klein cut him off. She can read, and I can interpret. She flipped through the prenup, then looked up. Temporary support is granted pending final determination. Attorney's fees are reserved, but I am inclined to enforce Clause 7 if the evidence continues to support concealment and misconduct. Grant's voice broke, furious. So she wins because she cried adultery. Elena turned toward him slowly. I didn't cry anything. She lifted her chin. I proved it. And then the door opened again, and a woman stepped into the room. Blonde hair, expensive coat, eyes wide with panic. Lila Jensen, Grant's assistant. She looked like someone who had walked into the wrong building and realized too late it was a trap. Victor's head snapped toward her. She's here? Lila's voice trembled. I got a call. They said I had to come. Judge Klein's gaze pinned her. Miss Jensen, you will be sworn in at the next session. Do not leave this courthouse. Lila nodded quickly, terrified. Grant turned toward her, eyes blazing with a silent command. Don't you dare. Lila's lips parted, then closed again. She looked at Elena, just a glance, but in that glance was guilt, fear, and something else, relief. Elena's stomach tightened. She realized what was coming. Sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. Sometimes it walks in quietly and sits down to tell the truth. Judge Klein adjourned for the day with a warning that sounded like prophecy. Mr. Ward, if you have been untruthful with this court, the consequences will be severe. Grant stared at Elena as the room emptied, his voice low and venomous. You think this makes you powerful? Elena's voice was steady. No. She picked up her folder. It makes me free. And if you're watching this, and your heart is pounding like you're in that courtroom with her, stay with me. Because Lila's testimony didn't just confirm an affair. It revealed the part of the story Grant never expected anyone to say out loud. By the time court resumed, word had spread through the courthouse like smoke. Not the details, those were sealed in procedure, but the feeling. Something big was happening in Ward versus Ward. Grant walked in looking like a man trying to hold a cracked statue together with sheer will. Victor Hale looked tired. Elena looked focused, not triumphant, focused. Judge Klein called Lila Jensen to the stand. Lila sat down like her bones had turned to glass. She swore in with a shaking voice. Victor stood first, attempting control. Ms. Jensen, you are here because Mrs. Ward is attempting to smear Mr. Ward. Lila's eyes flicked to Grant, then away. I'm here because I got subpoenaed. Victor's smile tightened. Do you have a personal relationship with Mr. Ward? Lila swallowed. Yes. Victor leaned in. Professional. Lila's eyes filled. The courtroom held its breath. Elena didn't move. She didn't glare. She simply watched. Lila whispered, It started professional. Grant's face went rigid. Victor snapped, Ms. Jensen, answer the question. Lila's voice broke. Yes, I had a personal relationship with him. A sound rippled through the gallery. Shock, pity, hunger. Grant's eyes squeezed shut for a second, as if he could unhear it. Judge Klein's voice was controlled. Ms. Jensen, did Mr. Ward use company funds in relation to this relationship? Lila nodded, tears slipping. Yes. Victor tried to salvage. Your Honor, she's emotional, unreliable. Lila looked straight at Victor, anger flaring through fear. I have the receipts. She reached into her bag and pulled out printed emails, travel confirmations, expense approvals, gift authorizations. Elena's stomach twisted, not because she wanted to hurt Lila, because she realized how easily Grant had used another woman the way he'd used her. Judge Klein reviewed the documents, then lifted her eyes to Grant. Mr. Ward, you previously denied this. Grant's voice was hoarse. I didn't. Judge Klein's gaze sharpened. You denied it under oath. Grant looked at Victor, desperate. Victor's face was a mask, cracking at the edges. Eleanor stood slowly. Your Honor, this triggers Clause 7. Judge Klein nodded once. It appears to. Marcus Reed was recalled briefly. He confirmed a second set of transfers tied to shell entities, entities that mirrored names in the sealed disclosure schedule Lydia Chen had provided. The forensic accountant, appointed per Clause 7, had delivered a preliminary report overnight. Judge Klein summarized without theatrics, which somehow made it more devastating. The report indicates significant undisclosed assets and intentional structuring to conceal beneficial ownership. She looked at Grant. Mr. Ward, this court is ordering an immediate freeze on all relevant accounts and an expedited full forensic audit. Grant's voice cracked, trying to regain dominance. You can't just... Judge Klein's gavel struck. I can, and I am. Victor rose, almost pleading now. Your Honor, we request settlement discussions. Elena's chest tightened. The idea that Grant could still bargain, still control, still turn this into a negotiation made her stomach churn. Judge Klein looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Ward, do you wish to consider settlement? Eleanor took a breath. Your Honor, I want what the contract says I'm owed and what the law says is fair. She turned to Grant, voice steady, eyes wet but unbowed. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Grant stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't, because the Elena he married, quiet, accommodating, willing to shrink, was gone, and the Elena he tried to humiliate in court had become something he couldn't command. Judge Klein set the final hearing date and made a note that sounded like a closing argument. If Clause 7 is triggered, the waiver provisions are forfeited. Equity transfer and fees may apply. The court will not reward deception. As the session ended, Grant leaned toward Elena one last time, voice low and shaking with rage. You think this ends with you winning? Elena looked at him, and her voice was almost gentle. Grant, it already did. The moment you underestimated me. And then came the final hearing, the one where Judge Klein didn't just expose his lies. She dismantled his empire in a way the law reserves for people who confuse money with immunity. The final day felt less like a divorce hearing and more like a reckoning. Grant arrived without his smug smile. The forensic audit had done what truth always does. It multiplied. It uncovered accounts, beneficial interests, hidden revenue streams, and a paper trail that made Grant's simple enforcement request look like a calculated ambush. Victor Hale's posture was still professional, but his confidence had evaporated into caution. Elena walked in holding the same folder, but she didn't clutch it anymore. She carried it like a tool, not a shield. Judge Klein reviewed the final report and spoke with the quiet authority that makes a courtroom go perfectly still. Mr. Ward, the forensic audit confirms concealment of assets and intentional misrepresentation in sworn filings. Clause 7 of the prenuptial agreement is triggered. The waiver of spousal support is forfeited. Separate property protections are forfeited to the extent defined by the agreement and applicable law. Grant's eyes widened in disbelief. That's not... Judge Klein raised a hand. You had multiple opportunities to be truthful. You chose strategy. She continued. The agreement requires equity transfer. 25% of Ward Dynamics equity interest shall be transferred to Mrs. Ward. Grant's voice cracked, panicked now. You can't take my company. Judge Klein's response was simple. I'm not taking it. The contract you demanded is. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to argue without insulting the judge's intelligence. Judge Klein went on. Mrs. Ward is awarded attorney's fees pursuant to Clause 7. Additionally, given the misconduct, this court awards spousal support in accordance with statutory factors. Grant's face twisted. She doesn't deserve... Eleanor spoke softly, and the room heard her anyway. I didn't deserve what you did. Judge Klein looked at Grant, and her eyes carried something colder than anger, disappointment. Mr. Ward, you attempted to weaponize this court to humiliate your spouse. You disparaged her. You concealed assets. You lied under oath. The court is referring this matter for further review regarding perjury and financial misconduct. Grant looked like he'd been punched without a fist. Elena's chest rose and fell, emotions swelling behind her ribs. Not joy. Not revenge. Relief mixed with grief for the years she'd spent making herself small so a man like him could feel large. Judge Klein turned to Elena. Mrs. Ward, you have represented yourself with remarkable restraint. I strongly advise you to retain counsel for post-judgment enforcement. Eleanor nodded. I will, Your Honor. Judge Klein's tone softened slightly. Do you have anything you wish to say before I enter the final order? Eleanor stood. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. I want the record to reflect that I never wanted to destroy him. I wanted him to stop destroying me. She looked briefly at Grant. I kept our home together. I kept our children safe. I kept his secrets. And the moment he decided my value was nothing, he forced me to prove I was more than the role he assigned me. Eleanor turned back to the bench. Clause 7 wasn't revenge. It was insurance. And it exists because deep down, I knew I might need protection from the person I loved. Silence filled the room. Grant didn't look at her. He stared at the table like it might open and swallow him. Judge Klein signed the final order. Judgment entered. The gavel struck. Elena exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 12 years. As she walked out of the courtroom, the whispers followed her again. But they weren't the same. Now they sounded like awe. Elena didn't smile for them. She didn't raise her chin in triumph. She simply walked into the hallway where the sunlight cut across the marble floor, and for the first time in a long time, she looked like someone who belonged to herself. And before you go, if you enjoyed this kind of courtroom drama where justice actually lands, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if someone tried to erase your entire life with a single contract, and you knew exactly which clause could bring it all back?